The golden age of The Simpsons. If you've spent even a little time hanging around the online Simpsons community, you've likely heard this term before. Although definitions tend to vary slightly, it usually describes the show's run from season 3 to season 7. As the name suggests, this is often considered the very best period the show ever had, with episodes that were by turns satirical, poignant, and absolutely hilarious. And this is a stance that, for the most part, I completely agree with. This was The Simpsons at its peak, and it remains its best run of episodes. And yet, in discussions about the show's early years, before the advent of what is now being commonly referred to as zombie Simpsons, and a little unfairly so, although that's a topic for another day, the first few seasons are comparatively overlooked. And sure, I get it. The animation is often crude, the comedy is not entirely on point, and the identity of the show has not yet been fully formed. But this period is actually incredibly unique in a lot of ways, with a style and identity all of its own. It's an endearing and charming run that is quite special in a lot of ways. And that's what I'd like to talk about today, because, and I'm going to give away the game quite quickly here, this is actually my favourite period of the show. So, let's take some time and have a retrospective look at The Simpsons' Silver Age. Firstly, I should make clear exactly what it is I mean when I refer to the Silver Age of The Simpsons. This will encompass the first, second, and third season of the show. That last inclusion may be a little contentious given that it's often included in the Golden Age, but I believe that, stylistically, it's far closer to the first two seasons than those that came afterwards. There are exceptions to this rule, of course, and certain episodes, Homer at the Bat for example, would likely be more at home in the Golden Age. I realise that all these definitions may seem a little unnecessary, but I really do believe they're important for understanding what makes this Silver Age different from the Golden Age. Because I think that, occasionally, there's an implicit idea amongst the online Simpsons community to believe these episodes to be inferior to those found in the Golden Age, especially in regards to the first and second seasons of the show. And there are obvious exceptions, of course. And I do strongly disagree with this mentality. The Silver Age simply happens to be quite different, because, for the most part, this isn't the show trying to find its identity. It's more so that its identity shifted as the show began to progress. Again, it might sound as if I'm splitting hairs here, but please bear with me. Those very early seasons of The Simpsons, in my eyes, are defined by an underlying sense of dissatisfaction and uncertainty. The narrative explored themes of depression and mental health, the class struggle, religion, bullying, the nature of mortality, and man's position in the universe. And although this fueled much of the comedy in the series, I don't think it would be a stretch to suggest that the comedy was often secondary to these themes, characters, and narratives. Golden Age Simpsons is often celebrated for the density and intelligence of its comedy. And in this regard, yeah, those early seasons can be a little lacking. There are exceptions, of course, again. The subplot in Lisa's substitute following Bart's campaign for class president is one of my personal favourite segments in the entire series. But for the most part, I would argue that there is less of a focus on that particular style of comedy, and more so on the development of narrative and character. To best illustrate the difference between the identities of these two periods, I'd like to make a quick comparison between two episodes. Season 5's The Last Temptation of Homer, and Season 3's Colonel Homer. Both follow a very similar narrative thread, dealing with Homer's potential infidelity and the reassertion of his affection for Marge. And they're both wonderful, touching episodes, but each also remains emblematic of the style of their respective eras. The Last Temptation of Homer is consistently hilarious, taking every opportunity to weave clever jokes into its narrative. And yet, I don't find the conclusion to be quite as affecting as that of Colonel Homer, which might seem strange, as I've underlined, both episodes essentially have a plot that is identical. But I find that an episode like Colonel Homer, although it is consistently less funny than The Last Temptation of Homer, to have a more of an emotional payoff. And instead of the episode ending with a joke that honestly seems a little intrusive, the reconciliation between Homer and Marge feels earned and emotionally moving. Now, I'll hold up my hands and admit I'm a little biased in this regard. Colonel Homer is actually my favourite episode of the show. But I also don't think you have to look particularly far to find that the majority of those early episodes contain many of those incredibly touching and emotionally resonant moments. I feel like now that I've hopefully been able to establish just why I believe that this period of the show deserves to be recognised and examined as its own distinct entity, rather than the prelude to the Golden Age, it will be interesting to explore each season individually, starting with Season 1. Season 1 is certainly the weakest of this particular period. Its 13 episodes are a little unbalanced at times, and the animation is undoubtedly quite crude, but it's amazing just to see how recognisable and fully formed the characters and the world of The Simpsons was right out of the gate. Homer, Marge, Lisa and Bart are all clearly defined and wonderfully realised even in those early episodes. And the season smartly gives them each episodes in which they are able to develop and shine. Homer grapples with the pressures of the holiday season and his identity as the head of the family in Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. Marge struggles with the mundanity of a family life in Life on the Fast Lane. And Lisa struggles with depression and finding a sense of belonging in Moaning Lisa. And the majority of these concepts are ones that will be developed in a better storyline than seasons 2 and 3. Moaning Lisa, for example, lays the groundwork for an episode like Lisa's Substitute. But I think it's often unappreciated just how strong The Simpsons was as a show when it first began. These episodes are a quantum leap ahead of the Tracy Ullman shorts that preceded the show, and I can't help but feel that they go overlooked a little too often for my liking. By no means is it perfect though. In summarising this season, I've highlighted some of its best episodes, but there are some that I would honestly forgive you for having forgotten entirely. The core of The Simpsons is fairly entertaining but distinctly unmemorable. The Crepes of Wrath, whilst inoffensive, borders on being a little difficult to believe with its dual plots about Bart taking down illicit winemakers by miraculously learning French as an exchange student, and The Simpsons providing home for another exchange student attempting to steal nuclear secrets from Homer's power plant. Again, like the core of The Simpsons, it's a fun watch, but it ends up feeling a little out of tune with the concerns and the realism of the other episodes. Some Enchanted Evening is similar in this regard, although it does get points from me for the hilarious resolution of its main plot and the intimate, sweet moment between Homer and Marge that closes out the season.
Lord help me, I'm just not that bright.
Oh, Homer, don't say that. The way I see it, if you raise 3 children who can knock out and hog-tie a perfect stranger, you must be doing something right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, personally, I can excuse a lot of this. Season 1 is the show at its loosest. Although I personally adore the fluidity and the expressiveness on the animation on display here, and to a lesser extent, the style present in seasons 2 and 3, it can stray towards seeming incredibly unusual and just off at times. And there are certain inconsistencies in presentations of character, the most notable being that Marge's bowling instructor, Jacques, in the episode Life in the Fast Lane, strangely loses his heavy French accent at one point in an attempt to yell for onion rings.
You hungry?
Yes.
4 onion rings!
And in highlighting this looseness, I don't mean to critique or put the show down in any way. Quite the opposite. It's clear that Season 1 is a work of sincerity. Even in the moments where the pieces don't quite align in the ways that they later would, it's hard to doubt the spirit and sincerity of the show and the genuine passion of the people who created it. Season 2 is an improvement on the first season in almost every way. The narratives are tighter, the characters more consistent, and the resolutions more emotionally resonant. I personally swing between this and Season 3 as being my favourite, and both are undeniably strong sets of episodes. The expanded episode run, up to 22 from the 13 that the first season had, allowed the creators a greater sense of freedom and creativity. This was the first season to feature a Treehouse of Horror episode, for example. And those strong moments of emotional resonance, rooted in the strong character development established in episodes like Life on the Fast Lane and Moaning Lisa, really begin to become apparent here. Lisa's Substitute, as an example, is one of the show's most renowned episodes, and for good reason. The episode deals with Lisa's feelings of alienation and depression, the episode quietly building towards the beautifully bittersweet moment in which she is given a piece of paper which contains what her substitute teacher assures her is the only thing she needs to know in times of doubt or sadness. You are Lisa Simpson. And this off-cited moment feels earned because it is rooted in the incredible character writing that has carried the series thus far and defines this period of The Simpsons for me. The episode contains another moment I'd like to highlight before we move on, because as much as this episode concerns Lisa, it also deals with Homer just as much, as he begins to fear his inadequacies as a father and begins to cause a rift between himself and his daughter. And, in an attempt to win her back, he tells her,
I just wish I knew what to say. Although maybe this music will help. Now, you lost someone special and it hurts. I'm lucky because I never lost anyone special to me. Everyone special to me is under this roof. It's true. Now, you'll have lots of special people in your life, Lisa. There's probably some place where they all get together and the food is real good and guys like me are serving drinks. Oh, well, maybe I can't explain all this.
and personally, I find this just as affecting as the moment that we previously talked about. Homer, in spite of his mistakes and in spite of his ignorance, desperately wants to be a good father. And that sense of struggle is palpable throughout the scene. The idea that he knows that he's not quite intelligent enough, not quite articulate enough to reach her. And, in a certain sense, he can't. Not entirely. But the fact that he continues to try and be a better father for her is what is able to reassert the connection once again. It's a truly wonderful and subtle moment in an episode full of them. Another standout episode that I'd like to highlight is One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, in which Homer eats a poisonous piece of sushi, which leads to him being given 24 hours to live, and deciding on how best to spend that time. And, in doing so, he discovers the value of his life all over again, enjoying moments with his children and reaffirming his relationship with his father. And yet, the whole thing is bittersweet, as the moments of genuine joy that Homer shares with his loved ones are undercut by the knowledge of the terrible fate that seemingly awaits him. And of course, he survives. I would be remiss to suggest that the viewer is ever really in doubt of Homer's safety. But the episode treats Homer's impending death and its own meditations on mortality and the meaning of life with the utmost seriousness, as to push those themes further and ensure the viewer's engagement with those ideas. As much as I love Golden Age Simpsons, I will admit that one criticism I sometimes have of it is that it sometimes chooses to undercut the reality or the gravity of the situations it presents for the sake of a gag, which, admittedly, is often justified by the quality of the joke being presented. But that is never the case here, and as Homer silently faces the dawn and grows still in his chair at the end of the episode, there's a real sense of despair and loss. And when the inevitable resolution comes and Marge finds that Homer is in fact still breathing, the real sense of joy they both exude feels earned, because the show has spent so much time immersing the viewer in a world that feels so well realised, populated with characters that feel genuine, that the viewer slowly begins to realise that they do care about. And this feeling of emotional honesty and sincerity that is so characteristic of these early seasons is abundant in Season 2. Bart's frustration at his realisation of his own academic limitations in an episode like Barkington F, Lisa grappling with the realities of her Christian faith and morality in Homer vs. Lisa on the Eighth Commandment, and the tender moment of vulnerability and affection shared between Homer and Marge at the end of Simpsons and Delilah. This last one in particular has always been a personal favourite of mine. At the beginning of the episode, Homer's new assistant at work, Carl, organises an anniversary surprise for Marge. Homer has, characteristically, forgotten. He hires a singer to perform an especially over-the-top rendition of the Billy Preston song You Are So Beautiful. And at the end of the episode, Homer having once again fallen from fortune, Marge comforts him by singing the song again. And the viewer is naturally invited to draw a comparison between the flash and artifice of the former performance and the tenderness of Marge's rendition. It's a beautiful moment. And this is not to suggest that the season lacks the humour and political satire that define much of the show's identity. 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish is a fantastic example of how to achieve both without sacrificing either. What distinguishes this period of the show from the Golden Age is that these elements, whilst being present, never tend to overpower the character and heart that was placed at the forefront of these episodes. And now we come to Season 3. And this is very much the stepping stone between what I have defined as the Silver Age and what is commonly referred to as the Golden Age. The lines that separate the two become a great deal more blurred at this point. the rapid-fire comedic efficiency of an episode like Homer at the Bat, that occasionally delves into moments of surrealism, bears much more of a resemblance to an episode like Marge vs. the Monorail than it does Bart Gets an F or Lisa the Greek. And Homer's triple bypass from season 4 is a thematic continuation of an episode like One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish. But, by and large, season 3 remains stylistically closer to those two seasons that preceded it than that which would follow. And this really is a fantastic set of episodes that demonstrates the strengths of this period of The Simpsons. Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington pits Lisa's political idealism against the reality of the corruption that flourishes in politics. Homer Alone serves as an expansion of the ideas of an episode like Life in the Fast Lane, as a lack of appreciation from the rest of her family causes Marge to undergo a mental breakdown and take a holiday to alleviate her stress. Bart the Lover serves as both an episode of development for Bart into humility and empathy, and is an interesting character study for Edna Krabappel, revealed to be a desperately unfulfilled woman trapped within a job that brings her little joy. It brings surprising depth to a character that thus far simply served as a secondary character for narratives centered around Bart. This aspect of her character was only really explored in the later modern seasons of the show, but that's a subject for another day. Season 3 was, undoubtedly, a period of transition for the show behind the scenes, which could account for the shift in style and identity the show began to undergo during this period. I haven't referenced much of the behind the scenes work over the course of this video, partially because of the fact that I realised that the conclusions that I might come to based on such data will be entirely speculative. However, I think it's particularly relevant here. Season 3 saw showrunners Al Jean and Mike Rice take over from Matt Groening, Sam Simon and James L. Brooks, and saw many of the last episodes from writers who would depart before the next season. And Season 4, although still retaining traces of Season 3, not least in the 2 episodes carried over from Season 3's production run, Camp Krusty and A Streetcar Called Marge, would see even more changes in the writing staff who penned many of the episodes we have talked about thus far, and many of the people who inevitably made the show what it was during that period. And in discussing this silver age of The Simpsons, I don't mean to critique the Golden Age. After all, I only prefer these episodes personally because I see them as prioritising a style that aligns more with my taste as a viewer. With that being said, I do often think they're unfairly overlooked in favour of those episodes. And I just wanted to highlight a very special period in the show's history that I believe deserves to be remembered more fondly than it is at the moment. I do hope you've enjoyed this video, as disjointed and messy as it may have seemed. Although, if I'm being honest, I think that's okay. Life is messy a lot of the time, and I think that's what I appreciate most about those early seasons of The Simpsons, because for me, they're a reflection of real life, as disjointed and messy and as complicated as it can often be. But there's always moments of real beauty and powerful emotion in there. And yeah, those early seasons are messy as well, far more so than what the show would later become. But I don't love them in spite of that, I love them because of that. And hopefully, you too can find something to love in the silver age of The Simpsons.